All right, so it is 12:02, so I think we can go ahead and get started. I just want to start off by welcoming everyone. We have about 23 folks on the line now, which is fantastic. If you look to your left, if you are using the online platform, there's a little chat window that you can submit questions at any time, which then in the open Q&A session, we can try to address all the questions that come through. We also have a list of questions that several people submitted previously, so we can go through some of those as well. Just as an introduction, this is Abby Hughes. I am the former student rep for Division 22, and in working with the current student rep, Samantha DiDio Stern, we polled some of our students in the past year and tried to figure out what are some areas that the new Student Leadership Network can contribute to improve student awareness of Division 22 and participation in Division 22. And one of the themes that continue to emerge is students are continuing to ask about self-care and work-life balance in the field of rehabilitation psychology. And so this was a great way to start one of our webinar series, taking 3 of our esteemed colleagues and members of Division 22 who span a number of areas of rehab psych. We have Brad Daniels, who is trained in both neuropsychology and rehabilitation psychology, and he'll talk a little bit about his experiences. We have Anna Kratz at University of Michigan, early career research scientist and faculty. And then we have Rhonda Williams, who's at the VA Puget Sound and rehab psych as well. And so lots of different areas of rehabilitation psychology, different career trajectories, and hopefully can answer some questions about what it's like to manage work-life balance in those particular settings. If following today's webinar you continue to have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is meant to be a jumping off point for continued discussion and how we can support students. And at the end of today's webinar, you should receive a link to a survey that we would greatly appreciate you filling out, just in terms of how this webinar went for you in terms of the content and quality of the presentations and speakers, and also the overall technology if you had any difficulties. This is our second time using AnyMeeting. It went pretty well the first time, but we can certainly look at other options if there's any difficulties. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded and it will be posted to the Division 22 website eventually. Your participation is completely voluntary, but we welcome questions and really encourage participation when we get to the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Each speaker will speak for about 5 to 10 minutes on their experience in rehab psych and how they've managed to maintain or challenges in work-life balance, and also what they do for self-care. When we finish that portion, then we'll go to the open Q&A session. So again, welcome and thank you all for being here. I will turn it over to Brad Daniels.
All righty, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to shoot for that short end of 5 minutes, and I have my little stopwatch here. So ready, set, go. Like Abby said, my name is Brad Daniels, and when I was asked to kind of put a little bit of this presentation together, I wanted to just sort of start out by sort of sharing a little bit of my actual sort of education, work, career aspects of my identity, and then also giving some adequate time to sort of who I am as a person outside of the work and outside of the field environment. And then I put a little time into thinking about what my tips would be to other people at various stages of their career for trying to work to achieve work-life balance, which I think I do an okay job of. It's always, an endless process of assessment and reassessment. That there's no question about that. But in terms of my background, I do originally come from a little bit more of a neuropsych traditional background. I got my clinical PhD in psychology with an emphasis in neuropsychology from UF in 2011, so I'm still early career. I did a internship at UAB that was a neuropsychology specific internship, but did have a lot of rehab heavy training rotations to it. And then after I had completed that and gotten my doctoral degree, I went on to the Tampa VA and did their APA accredited 2-year rehab psychology postdoc, which I finished up in 2012. And since then, my first, quote unquote, big boy job, I'm actually moved back to my hometown of Orlando, and I currently work at Orlando Health, and primarily Orlando Health's flagship hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center serving the Central Florida area. And I am a rehabilitation neuropsychologist, where I work about 90% of my time is in inpatient rehabilitation, split between neurological diagnoses, TBI, stroke, and things like that, as well as ortho-spine types of patients. And then I do a little bit of limited outpatient intervention work with some of my former inpatients that I had seen during their stay if they needed a little bit more services post-discharge once they went home. And I've been here for 3 years now, and I got board certified in rehab psych October of last year, and have co-founded the Rehab Riffraff to kind of help others go through that program too. And then at the bottom there's just a couple other little things. I'm a membership committee co-chair for Division 22. I'm starting on as a practice sample reviewer with ABRP, and I also typically will teach like a night class at least one semester out of the year at one of the local colleges, just because I really enjoy teaching. In terms of my my personal life, I've been married to my lovely wife Tiffany for about going on 8 years now. We got married in March of 2008. We don't have any kids, but we have 2 four-legged children that we love very much and spend quite a bit of time with. And as I said, I moved back to my hometown. I'm kind of fortunate. My sister, as well as my parents, still live here, and so I have a 6-year-old niece and a 2-year-old nephew that I spend a lot of time with as well. When I'm not working, especially during like a typical work week, I tend to be a little bit more of a homebody, that I like to get home and, put on sweatpants and just kind of lounge around, watch television, float in the pool or things like that during the week. And then it's more of the weekend times where I'll go out and do more social activities and things. When I get an opportunity to get away, I really like to travel. In particular, the American West is sort of one of my favorite places to go, especially Colorado. And I've got, a lot of your typical kind of general hobbies. I really love to watch movies and television shows, video games. Love to read football and fantasy football, although both my Gators as well as my fantasy football team are not doing very well this year. But I always hold out hope for next year. And then one of the things that's a really big passion for me, if I had not become a psychologist, I probably would have gone to culinary school. So I always love to cook, as well as, whenever I travel, kind of finding really special dining experiences and things like that to enjoy and kind of make memories of. In terms of some of the biggest tips for me in terms of trying to achieve work-life balance, some of the things that I would recommend, one of the biggest ones is, first and foremost, just kind of establishing a really like doorstep-to-doorstep mindset regarding work and life, meaning that, from the moment that you step out of your door each morning to the moment you get back, you're at work, and really kind of conceptualizing and including whatever your commute time is into that, because that's still time away from you doing the kinds of things that you want to do with your life. And so really having that as a mentality, and then closely related to that, to the fullest extent possible that you can, always try and live as close to where you work as humanly possible. And that's sort of an interesting little conundrum, because you can hear that and say, oh, well, maybe if you're so close to work, then you could get, pulled back in when you're not supposed to be there or things like that. But for me, it's really about making sure that that commute time and the time it takes you to get back and forth is really as short as possible. Throughout my training, I've had a 5-minute walk to work. When I was up at UAB on internship, I've had an hour and 15-minute drive during my postdoc, and right now I have a 30 to 40-minute commute, either 30 by car or 40 if I take the train to work, and I can tell you that nothing comes remotely close in terms of my general mental well-being and work-life balance as when I had that 5-minute walk to work. That if you can work close to somewhere where there's reasonable accommodations to live, pay pay whatever it costs and live close to work. That's a big one for me. We always teach sleep hygiene to people. I'm a really big believer in actually kind of practicing what you preach, though. I pretty much need my 8 hours of sleep each night, and even though my wife will make fun of me for it and call me an old man, I'm in bed at 9:45 and I'm up at 5:45 every single day, even on weekends. Just kind of making sure that you kind of practice what you preach with regards to sleep hygiene and making sure that you get as much sleep as you actually need. I also really like to kind of always have something that you're reading. Reading is a big hobby of mine. And always have sort of something that you're reading that's purely for leisure, that's not necessarily a textbook or sometimes maybe too much of an intellectual exercise, but just something to kind of wind down a little bit is always something important. I mentioned earlier just, assessing and reassessing yourself for any signs of burnout if they come up. I know sometimes we can have a tendency to take something home with us that we want to work on, and you got to really realize and appreciate if you don't have any more left in the tank, then stop what you're doing, and make sure that you know what the issue is, and if you need to take a mental health day, don't hesitate to take one. Another thing too, the farther you get along in your career, you're going to be presented with a lot of different opportunities. And if you really enjoy what you're specifically doing, that even if it takes up a lot of your time, it can still be really enjoyable and rewarding for you, and can kind of blur those lines of work and life and what you really find pleasurable. But if you start to find that you're saying yes to things that deep down you really don't want to do, or you're spending time on stuff that just doesn't have any real return for you, don't do it. It's harder when you're in the early stages of your education and graduate school and working on internships and postdocs. It's a little harder to say no to people that you feel maybe might have a say in your letter of recommendations or things like that. But as you get farther along, and it's not even very long into your career, that you can start getting an opportunity to just be like, no, I'm not going to do that. Don't be afraid to say no. And then lastly, a little bit of a joke one there. I say marry somebody incredibly attractive, which, that's subjective. But what I really mean is, having somebody, whether if you're seeking out a relationship, making sure that that relationship in and of itself is healthy, especially as you go through school and the pressures of internship and postdoc and matching and all of that stuff. If your relationship is causing you stress on top of your other stress, it's not a good thing. So just making sure that you have somebody that, shares your values and really supports you, and that is very important. So I went a little over. Sorry. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Brad. That was such a nice summary, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially coming out of the process so recently. And with many of the students on the call have interests in both neuropsych and rehab psych. Just with the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next presenter, who's Anna Kratz at University of Michigan. I'm just loading up her slides now. And Anna, if you want to take it away whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Unfortunately, my slides don't have such nice pictures, so I guess I have to be more interesting in my talking. So just a little bit about me. I earned my PhD in 2009, so I'm also pretty early career, and was mostly trained as a health psychologist until I went and did my internship actually at the Seattle VA, which is where Rhonda Williams, the next presenter, was one of my supervisors. I can attest to her being a great example of work-life balance already. And then I did my fellowship at the University of Washington, also in rehabilitation psychology. So I came to the University of Michigan in 2011. And when I landed here, I was 100% research from day one. So I was on other people's grants until I got my own funding. I've worked full-time the whole time I've been here, and I am seriously like 40 to 42 hours a week. I am not here all day, despite the fact that I have 3 NIH grants, a couple of foundation grants. I'm very busy, but I try to work efficiently and come early and leave early. before I go on to the next section, I just want to share a little bit about my motivation for participating in this webinar. I feel really strongly about work-life balance. As a trainee, I went to a couple of different seminars like this, one at a conference and one at a more informal, like, local meeting. And I found them to be completely demoralizing. Work-life balance was actually one of the main concerns I had as especially a graduate student. I was really stressed out, working all the time. I was married before graduate school, still married to the same guy, and I couldn't imagine having kids on top of all the work. But I knew I wanted to have kids, and I knew I wanted a research career, and kind of nothing in my environment was saying that that was going to be possible. So I was sort of freaking out as a trainee, not really understanding how that was going to happen. And, the few seminars I went to, basically the messages I took away were, don't do a research career. It's just not possible to do that and have a family and a fulfilling life. The other message I got was you need to sleep less, which Brad and I will disagree with. And the third message I got was don't have kids until you're tenured. All very demoralizing messages to me at the time. So I'm really hoping that while I can't give anybody the formula for having work-life balance, I can give you hope, because at one time I was hopeless. And I like Brad, I don't think I have the answer. I haven't arrived at work-life balance. But I can say that my balance is way better than I ever thought it could be. And I think there's some objectively wrong ways to seek balance, like not sleeping is not a good one. Putting off kids until you're infertile is not a good one. But there are lots of ways to find balance. So hopefully you can find some little gems between the three of us to find your own balance in your life. So a little bit more about my life. Right now I have 2 dear children. I didn't include pictures. I should have. They're adorable. I have a son who's 3 and a daughter who's 5. I have a stay-at-home spouse. So my husband, who I've been married to since 2001, he followed me to graduate school at Arizona State. He followed me to internship and fellowship, and now he's followed me here. He's an architect in his real life, and wanted to stay home with our kids, which I cannot say what a blessing that's been. Of course, there's a lot of cost benefit, right? Like one of the benefits is it's easier for me to have more of a life outside of work. Because I don't have to come home and just, do all the shopping and cooking and stuff that I imagine I'd have to do if he weren't home and able to do some of that. But, we don't have 2 incomes. So that's definitely you have to evaluate your values. And by the way, the 2 incomes thing, I had to buy a very small house, but it's only 5 miles from work. And in Ann Arbor, that's like a 15-minute drive. So I'm right there with Brad about you do not want to be spending 2 hours on the highway both ways to work every day. You won't have time for a life if you do that. So I think that for me, making health a priority has been really important. And there have been times in grad school and forward where I've lapsed in that and really paid a price. So I've always been pretty good about keeping up with exercise. Sleep has been a problem, especially when I've had my kids, and kind of getting back my sleep, because kids kind of tend to steal sleep, whether you like it or not. And getting my sleep back has been a huge priority. And my mental health has been so much better since my kids have gotten to an age when I could sleep. And having kids, there's nothing like that to kind of highlight the importance of sleep in your life. The other thing is good food, and I don't just mean yummy food, which I think can be very rewarding in and of itself, but I really pay attention to what I put into my body, and feel like if I'm not hitting on all those health things, I just can't function in work life or home life. So I do have a few faraway friends that I keep in contact with, mostly girlfriends that I text or email or Skype with, and a few local friends. One of the greatest things I have going on in my life right now is I run in the mornings with a group of moms. Some of them are other faculty members. Now, we have to get up and run at 5 a.m. because we're all so busy. But I tell you, it's a great way to socialize and kind of hit that exercise thing at the same time. And then I'm involved with my church community, and not as much as I probably would be if I didn't have a bunch of other stuff going on, but it's kind of a nice continuity for me. As far as hobbies go, I had a lot more involvement in hobbies, like I love movies too, I love TV too, and with kids I just don't do as much of that, but now like my kids' hobbies are my hobbies in a way. So I do a lot of stuff at their schools, and then I like that the picture I have here. My house is clean enough to be healthy, but dirty enough to be happy. That's kind of like a theme for my entire life. Like, it's just good enough. Like, I had to really lose a lot of my perfectionism trying to balance work and home life. So some top tips for work-life balance. I think that there's a lot of twisted thinking. We should all have some familiarity with CBT and twisted thinking. I think we all have probably some core beliefs that have been informed by mentors and training along the way about that your value and your virtue comes from working all the time. You need to change your thinking about that before your behaviors will ever change. You need to care more about your values in life than what other people think. And I think that's part of the changing your core beliefs. I really had to say, what's important to me, and should I listen to the voices in my ears, and in my head saying, not the voices in my head, but the people out there saying, you'll enjoy that, right? The people out there saying, you need to be working more, or I'm working 70 hours and I'm more valuable to the department because of that. You need to think about, ultimately you're responsible for your life at the end of the day. I really watch out for and avoid time sucks. And I find that a lot of meetings suck a lot of time that isn't really worthwhile. You need meetings, but sometimes a 2-hour meeting can be a half-hour meeting, and when I'm in charge of meetings, I make them short. And be really efficient. Make the minutes count in your day. I'm getting better at this, but I still need to work on saying no more often, and that gets back to what Brad was saying about, doing what you enjoy. I agree with that. Sometimes I do things because I have to do them because they pay for my staff or something. But I try to do things that I'm interested in. I really believe that we all create the culture that we live in. So how I behave affects the person in the office next to me. And I think you can really make a statement and help change your culture by behaving in the way that's true to your values. So I've noticed that, there's been a slight shift in the values right in my kind of working group based on how I conduct myself. And I think we can change the work-life balance culture around us, and that gets a little easier as you go through your career, I think, and you're not the newbie. And I think it's easier to kind of make those statements if you do good work. So you can't be, obviously a slacker and then be like, well, I'm going to go home now. It's 3:00. If you're really productive, it's a lot easier to make a statement about work-life balance. If you're not organized already, you can get a lot more done if you are organized and if you can prioritize things. I'm getting a lot better about triaging stuff and getting the stuff done that needs to get done. And working with really good people, when you get to the point where you can write your own grants and that sort of thing, or choose from some different clinical positions, you want to pick the job, I would say, based on the people more than anything, because they're going to either make your job easier and enjoyable or not. And then very quickly, work-life balance, the life part. I've had to be willing to let cherished things go for a while, like perfectionism or having things just a certain way. I went for a couple of years without wearing any makeup because I'd rather have time to work out, and I felt like I didn't have time for that. And that's okay. I'm back to wearing makeup now. There's times in your life, and for me it was when my kids were really young, that I just had to let some things go. And that's hard for somebody who's very type A. But I've seen type A people who cannot find this work-life balance thing, and they can't make it work. And if you're not, like I said before, if you're not taking care of your health, everything else is going to suffer. I think simplicity is a big thing, especially if you have kids. And I must have written this on a really great parenting day. If you want kids, just have them. Don't overthink the timing. I get that question all the time. When's the best time? You know what? Having kids is going to be like the biggest change in your life, no matter what. There's probably better times than other times, but you know, it's one of those things where it's going to be a huge transition no matter what. And I don't think you can avoid that. And like Brad was saying, you never arrive at balance. It's always adjusting and readjusting. And I think partnering with somebody who's attractive in terms of values is really important. The other stuff too. But if my husband wasn't supportive of the lifestyle we lead, it would be really hard, right? If he was he is super motivated. But if he was, somebody who wanted to work 70 hours, and he was working 70 hours before he stayed home, my life would be very different if he had stayed in that job. And having kids, it just, we had similar values. We didn't want to do that. So I think partnering with somebody who has values like you is really, really important to finding work-life balance. Anyway, I know I've gone way over. This is really hard. So I think I'm done. And now I get to hear from Rhonda, one of my favorite supervisors of all time.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Sorry, Abby, I interrupted you.
Oh, no worries. So, no, my apologies. No, but thank you so much, Anna. And I think your caveat about your passion for helping students navigate work-life balance and your experience with getting not a lot of support on that early in your career, I think that resonates with a lot of people. So hopefully this particular webinar and meeting is valuable, not one of those time sucks for everyone. But I've go ahead and put up Rhonda Williams's presentation. So this is Rhonda Williams, again, VA Puget Sound. Rhonda, take it away.
Okay. I just have to say how heartwarming that was to hear you both talk. And Anna, I concur with just about everything you said. And I have to say I sort of felt like a proud mentor-parent moment when I was sort of thinking, oh my gosh, that's so great that, we have these aligned perspectives. And it was just really lovely to hear that, having seen you, I think, maybe at the part first when you were more demoralized. So this is just heartwarming to hear. And I agree with everything that Anna and Brad have shared so far. So I guess I'm probably the most senior person on this panel, having been in my current job for 15 years. I finished my PhD in '99, and I also went to ASU. I realized it's funny, the things I mentioned as part of my career are different now than I would have mentioned early career, because it can all be distilled into a pretty simple bullet or two. So I started off full-time. This was my job out of postdoc at University of Washington, and then I was very fortunate to be able to cut down to part-time after my first child was born. That's not an option that's always available for people, and I was not even fully aware at the time what a valuable thing that was. I currently have a functional description of my position that involves truly a 50-50 research and clinical split. I have an associate faculty position at the University of Washington, and I've been increasingly productive with grants over the years, but just got my first NIH funding in 2013. All right, next. There we go. So I have two kids, aged 10 and 9, and it's very busy in a wonderful way. It's less busy than young kids in the sense that I actually sleep through the night every night. I don't have to feed them and dress them, but I do get them to 4 to 6 activities per week. We have a lot of homework every night. My husband is an internist, and he also works part-time, and I have to really credit him with advocating that I work part-time too after our first child was born. I probably started my career with an average of 50 hours of work a week, and it took me quite a while to let go of my type A tendencies and settle into this pace where I'm at now, which really is about 33 hours a week. We have some local family in Seattle where we live, which is a true blessing. So I totally agree with what has been said about living close to work. And if you can live close to work and close to family, that's really invaluable, especially if you have kids. Like Anna was saying, I feel like there have been times in my life where I have let my health lapse and just paid for it in so many ways. And so I prioritize exercise, sleep, and eating well above just about all things. I go to the gym, and then I walk my big old dog as often as I can. In addition to my parenting responsibilities, I have a mom with a lot of health problems who I provide support for whenever I can, so I think I really am in that sandwich generation. I'll just confess, I am not on any social media. I don't have any accounts, so that's not really much of a time suck for me. I have a few really treasured friendships that I maintain. Okay, let's see. So, tips. I really think it is possible to have it all at once, or to have it all, but it is not possible to have it all at once, and probably not advisable to have it all at once. And having it all, by that I mean it's possible to have a meaningful career, and it's possible to have a family, and it's possible to be healthy. But I think it's important to recognize that a meaningful career may not be quite the same with and without kids. You know, my publication rate has slowed way down. I'll probably, it'll take me a year or so longer than my colleagues to get to full professor. I will have about 75% of their publications and grants. But at the end of the day, I still feel like that is a wonderful, meaningful, and rewarding career. I agree with what Anna said about choosing your place of employment really carefully. And for me anyways, although I have counseled mentees about this over the years, I think it is far more important to work with good people in a place that supports balance rather than, have to study a particular thing. And I agree you also can shape your work environment. I hadn't thought of that till you mentioned it, Anna, but it's great. And then I would agree with Anna's suggestions of prioritizing and organizing. The only thing I would add to that is figure out what your employer's stakeholders are. So if your department requires you to write grants and write papers and nothing else, then don't do anything else. Do what you need to do and have your time match the priorities that you and your stakeholders identify as important. And literally say no to everything else. I'm pretty ruthless about saying no. I consider long and hard what is worth my time, and I say no very freely to the point where most people ask me now with a preface, I know you're extremely busy and you probably won't do this, but would you consider? And I think that that's not a bad way to be, to have it. If you are thoughtful enough about what you do and don't do, you will shape your environment, and eventually people will stop asking you to do things that are not meaningful or not a good use of your time. I totally agree with what you said, Anna. If you are going to say no to things and be ruthless and influence change in your department, you have to do excellent work. You can't be your contribution on any project has to be valuable enough that if you take longer to get it in or can't do it, at 5 o'clock at night, people consider it worthwhile to work around your constraints. And I can't say enough about hiring excellent people. Often trainees ask me, how do you get all this stuff done? And I say, truly, it's because I have 9 people that I supervise, and they are phenomenal. They do great work. So, tips. Like Anna said, stay healthy. Keep your family healthy. If your kids are sick, your life will be very stressful, especially if you have 2 working parents. Tend and protect your marriage. I feel like, sort of like Stephen Covey's 7 priorities, these are the sharp and the saw things. Figure out your priorities and then take care of yourself and your important people. Take real vacations. I really counsel my staff and trainees not to be available when you're on vacation. Don't write a grant on a vacation or you're not on vacation. Don't answer your emails. Truly take vacations. And then I say this next one with the realization that it requires some explanation. Raise your kids yourself as much as you can. And I say that because I made some mistakes early on. I really approached coming back to work after my kids from the perspective of how do I get enough help to cover childcare so that I can still be at work all the time? And thankfully, my husband kind of pointed out that maybe we don't want to be doing that. Maybe we want to be asking different questions like how can we get away from work enough to raise our own kids? And I am so grateful that he did that. And the reason that I pass along this advice is because I have known people that realize after the fact that they missed out, and it's only a short window that your kids are so interested in being with you and so impressionable. And if you want to have a family, then really have a family and enjoy it and don't miss out on what a great thing that is. And I'm not there yet, but I do feel like it's probably money in the bank in terms of, you know, if you are really there for your kids when they're young, then I have this hope, I'll let you know how it goes, that maybe the teenage years will be a little bit easier, or maybe there's, you know, you do it regardless, but I have this feeling that, you know, it does set you up for a better parenting experience throughout. Don't miss out on elementary school activities. I didn't chaperone any field trips or do any classroom volunteering for the first couple years. And then, thank God, I figured out that I should do that, and I thought, oh my gosh, how could I almost missed out on this. So don't make that mistake. Don't miss out on it. I've used leave time, you know, to do those things, and my kids mention them over and over and over. And when I think back on the highlights of my kids' early years, it's going to be walkathon and Halloween party and publishing party. So I guess as much as anything, I'd like to give you permission to value those things, savor it, and underschedule whenever you can. We've kind of figured out these formulas where if we've got a lot going on one weekend, we'll very deliberately do nothing the next weekend. Okay, I confess normally on a call like this, I would be literally working out in my office, but I tried to put myself on speaker and hung up, and I've had to call back in twice. So I'm actually sitting and participating. And if I'm running a conference, I'll sit and participate. But generally, whenever I can, I am moving around. I've talked about being efficient. Probably socially is where that's the hardest, especially if you're kind of a sociable person, which I think I am. But I have gotten to a point where I work with my door shut, I keep my fingers on my keyboard, and I've shaped the people I work with to starting conversations with, is now a good time? And if it's not a good time, I'll say, no, I'm so sorry, but I'm happy to make time. Because if I chat for, 10 or 15 minutes at work, that's 10 or 15 minutes that doesn't get done that I have to do at night. And when you sort of look really concretely at where that time comes from, it can help you be a little clearer about if that's how you want to spend it. Like Anna said about eating good food, I have learned that really what this is about is honoring the fact that to stay healthy and run a household that has other people in it, for me anyways, it takes about 2 or 3 hours a day. Most of that involves packing lunches from home, making sure the kids eat a good breakfast, prepping dinner, cleaning up. I think that you don't realize how many hours it takes to run a household until you actually time it. And now I realize it takes me about 3 hours a day to run the household. So I honor that that is what I'm doing. I honor that it takes me about 3 hours a day to coordinate kid activities and homework. And when you think about, okay, I'm going to leave home now and I've got 6 hours of being a parent and sort of define it as such, I think it allows you to appreciate really how to live in accordance with your values. It takes this much time to be a parent and a wife. And I agree, perfection is sort of the enemy of the good. Know what has to be excellent and make sure it is so that you're credible. And then anything that can be good enough has to be good enough. And I think that's it. Do I have any more? No, that's it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, all three of our great presenters today. We have a list of questions that some of the attendees sent in ahead of time, so I can get the ball rolling here. But if any of the attendees on the line would like to submit a question, you can type one into the chat bar, or you can unmute your microphone. And when we finish at least some of the pre-sent in question and answers, please feel free to speak up. So fortunately, you've actually addressed a lot of the questions that were sent in, but I just wanted to follow up with a couple. One of the questions that's come up for students or trainees in general, I think this talk in particular has really highlighted how you can achieve work-life balance at the career level. But I think as Brad alluded to, when you're a trainee, there's some additional pressures because of the evaluative nature of being a trainee. And even though we talk about work-life balance and sometimes we're even evaluated on work-life balance as trainees, there's that pull of how do we discuss these challenges with a mentor? So I was wondering if any of you could speak to maybe how to navigate that work-life balance as a trainee so that you set up good habits for later in your career.
Well, this is Anna. I can speak to this a little bit. I think just, habits, the longer they're sort of enacted and the more they become a true habit, the easier they are to maintain. So I really got in the habit of taking care of myself physically in graduate school. I think, too, the second piece that you were talking about is the mentorship. And not all mentors are going to be good mentors for this area. So you get different things from different mentors. And I think you can kind of look and see how your mentor or mentors are doing and whether or not you think that they might have some good insights for you. I think the ones who do have good work-life balance and who are intentional about that are probably very happy to talk about that with mentees. And, I've had some mentors that I just won't even broach that with, either because I don't see them as having similar values to me, or we just don't have that kind of relationship. But, yeah.
Thank you. We just had a question come in from the chat bar. As a postdoc, it is difficult to internalize the concept of good enough. Can you expand a bit on how to achieve this and maybe what that looks like from a supervisor's perspective?
Maybe I'll field that because I think this is a really great question. And I think it's an important question to raise with your supervisors and to operationalize. So, for example, if you have a clinical supervisor, I think it's really useful to spend time defining what do they think is a reasonable workload and how is that determined? Are there specific timelines for notes being entered? And I know at VA Puget Sound we have a peer review process that is used to evaluate the quality of our documentation. And so I know that I like to be transparent with trainees about what kinds of documentation standards the staff are held to, and I don't expect people to write at that level as a trainee, but I think it's really useful to know how those things are defined and by whom, and have those kinds of conversations so that you have an operational sense of what is good enough. And so I tend to say things like, if you think that a document, like a neuropsych report, is going to be viewed by a lot of people or used in an outside setting or be something people refer to, that's a document that needs to stand alone and probably represent your most excellent clinical work, if you will. So those are sort of some of the considerations, because I think the goal of your internship and fellowship year is to figure out how to calibrate this exact question for yourself. And so when you're on your own and you need to figure out what has to be perfect and what has to be good enough, you need to know what questions to ask. So those are questions that I would say almost always are going to involve stakeholders. Your department will know, how many publications are required for certain levels of promotion or how many grants. There's quite a few sort of objective benchmarks out there that vary by institution, but have those conversations early on, because it really does need to be contractually agreed upon, I think, in order for you to figure out how to prioritize.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was very well said, and I think kind of taking it to a little bit more of a global level, I think it's just kind of getting into the mindset that in some ways in the long run, and I think it's true at the trainee standpoint, but then also later in the career standpoint, like I think I've been more successful when I've done 5 things really well than when I, kept saying yes and yes and yes to people about opportunities and then found myself doing like 8 things sufficiently, but not necessarily, really quality kind of stuff. I think it's the idea of good enough is, more about just making sure that you realize that you're not going to be able to be perfect at everything. But if you can really keep an eye on that quantity issue and try and do really good work with what you do take on, and be mindful of when you're overloaded, and then start that switching to saying no, or no but, like I can't do this right now. This is a great opportunity. I do want to do it, but I need to get something off my plate first. Can we revisit this next quarter or something like that? But I think doing 5 things really well is much better than doing 8 things okay.
This is Anna. I've had supervisors along the way tell me, you're spending too much, you're being too much of a perfectionist. So it was a really hard lesson for me to learn. And what I found helpful as a trainee was being really concrete with my supervisors. Like, I did a program development, for instance, during an internship, and it was just taking up all this time. So I talked to my supervisor and said, I'm spending like 10 hours a week on this. Should I be spending more? Like, where you can ask questions like, well, where should I be putting my energy right now, and what are the priorities? And then when you get to the point where you are a mentor, help people figure that out. I had a mentee yesterday who got a request for some administrative paragraph where somebody just wanted an update on her project, and she was spending like half the day on it. I'm like, no. Hit the high points. They're going to check off the box. Help your mentees when you start figuring out, to basically make those decisions, because they're not easy. It's a very gray area for a long time, and I'm just starting to get better at that myself.
Thank you. Another question we had sent in was regarding that the student said she's heard of institutions offering an option to stop the tenure clock or the promotion clock in order to accommodate major life events like the birth, adoption of a child, or prolonged sickness of a family member. Are there any disadvantages for men or women who decide to use this option? And are there particular times to use it that would be worse than others? For example, during the first year of a position versus maybe the year before that promotion?
This is Rhonda. I can comment on that because I literally went through this. So when I went up for promotion as an associate professor at the University of Washington, that's considered a mandatory promotion, which means you, within 6 years of being hired, need to move into an associate professor position. And in the University of Washington, anyways, we're assigned a mentor with whom we can discuss when would be the optimal timing. And there's a general sentiment that you should go up when you're ready. And there are clear criteria about what readiness looks like in terms of grant success, publication success, teaching reviews, etc. And if you go up early, it's usually in your 5th year instead of your 6th year. And the advantage is if there's any deficiencies that need to be corrected, or the committee that's based, on other departments, representation from other departments doesn't think you're ready, you've got another year, you get another kick at the can. If you defer because you've had kids, and I did go up in my 6th year because I had 2 kids in my first 6 years, and I think that my publication record was a little slower, then you basically have to get it done. So I know that there are mechanisms in place where people can defer. I think there was an option for me to defer another year if there had been really extenuating circumstances. But I guess I would discourage people from thinking about I think, as you mentioned, Anna, having a kid explode your life whenever it happens, and it does slow you down a little bit. But I think there's value in still trying to kind of work within the guidelines, unless you have a kid that maybe had a significant illness and it really took you off the rails. Talk with your mentors about when it makes sense for you to apply for promotion. And if there's flexibility, in our case there was. I could have gone up in 5th or 6th year, but I went up in 6th, and that was because I felt readier at that stage, and it was pretty clear from my mentor's feedback that I was going to. They don't recommend you for promotion internally if they don't think that you're going to make it. And ideally, this is a conversation that starts, as soon as you're hired as part of that, okay, what are the expectations of my stakeholders kind of discussion. So forgive me, I'm rambling a little bit. I don't know if there are advantages or disadvantages. I know that it's possible. It varies by institution, and it's something I would encourage you to plan well ahead. To the degree that you can avoid special circumstances and special requirements, especially early in your career, I think that's probably useful. I don't know if others would disagree, but that was my experience.
This is Anna, and I think Michigan has a slightly different system. First of all, I started my faculty job with a 6-month-old and then had another child within a year and a half. So this was very relevant to me. I took the extra year, but the way that works at Michigan, so I was only in my second year of my faculty position, is they basically just tag on, it's like opening up the window a little bit more. Now, I took that and I actually filed the paperwork for it, not ever anticipating having to use it. So I did not in my mind say, okay, now I'm just going to take an extra year. I still, want to go up on time or early. But it felt like I didn't know what my life was going to be like, and you just sort of never know. So for me, it was nice to just have that option of extending the window. I won't get in trouble for going up earlier before that window hits. So I think every system's a little different too in how they extend that buffer for life events. So, but yeah, I would agree with Rhonda that I didn't really mentally say, oh, well, this is, and kids do explode your life, but it hasn't done it so much for me that I feel like, I'm not going to be able to make tenure. You have some slow years, and that's okay. You can make up for it. I actually called pregnancy for academics. When I was pregnant, I was super productive, actually, because I knew that the slow time was coming after the baby was here. And I would write, papers and grants sort of faster than normal, and I called it nesting. That's like an academics nesting. Now, everybody's not like that, but that's how I handled it. So
that's great.
I'm going to write all these grants and papers to feather my nest, and then I can kind of relax for a while. So
love it.
But yeah.
Thank you. This question may be a little bit more relevant to Brad, but one of the students was asking with regard to geographical choices. I think we're always told as trainees, don't, if at all possible, don't limit yourself geographically during training because you have to get into a good graduate program, and then you have to get a good internship, postdoc, yada, yada, yada. But as far as after that point, is it okay to then take into account geographical considerations like being closer to family, regardless of whether you're wanting to start a family or not, or be close to family? What is your perspective on the geographical piece?
Excellent question. So I do agree definitely that there is a huge truth with regards to when it comes to applying for internships or postdoctoral residencies or things like that, but especially at the internship level, given the imbalance, you definitely don't want to limit yourself geographically. You want to keep your options open. That doesn't mean that you apply anywhere where if you actually did go there, that you would be miserable. I always tell people that you can, and again, this is the Floridian in me, but you can apply for internship at the University of North Dakota. If you're going to cry if you match there, don't apply. That you want an internship, but you want to not be miserable at the same time. When it comes sort of later down the line and you're actually looking at, starting a career, that's a little different. That's not something that is, not something you're probably going to see yourself in for just 1 year or, at most 2 consecutive years of your life. So you do want to start thinking a little bit more about where your long-term interests lie, and to the extent that you can control that, you can be a little bit more selective when it comes to the geographical areas and things like that. For those of you who are kind of see yourself down the line doing something that is more of pure rehabilitation psychology, if you're either a student affiliate or a member of Division 22 and you get the Division 22 listserv things, at least 3 or 4 times a day, there's a job posting that comes up. There's one that came up at 1:47 p.m. for the Orlando VA, which is beautiful. That there's lots of opportunities that present themselves from a geographic standpoint. With me individually, my job ended up being in my hometown, but I never saw myself actually going back to Orlando after I finished up my residency at Tampa. It just was random happenstance. I met a guy at a Division 22 conference in Fort Worth who happened to be from Orlando and ran the neuropsych department here and was hiring. It's really great that it sort of, gave me an opportunity to get back, close to where my parents are, close to where my sister and my niece and nephew and things like that are. That wasn't necessarily the only sort of be-all, end-all for me. But if that's something that's really important to you, you have to be mindful of that as well. You just also have to know, like, if what you want to do is like, inpatient rehabilitation psychology, or, something that's really kind of specialized or specific or population-based, your family or your hometown may not necessarily be the best place for you to find that career. Or if there is a career there may only be one, and there may not be a ton of backups that wouldn't necessarily require you to then move if that job didn't work out. So I think you kind of be mindful of it, and it definitely does give you a little bit more opportunity to be geographically choosy. I don't think that when you're looking at long-term jobs, I don't think that you necessarily consider going somewhere that you don't honestly want to potentially put down roots if you love that job, though.
Great. Thank you. So just in the interest of time, and everyone's been talking about being efficient with time management, we do want to end on time. I didn't receive any other questions through the chat. However, everyone has my email address, so please don't hesitate to send additional questions and we can get back to you. Thank you so much to all of the presenters today and taking time out of your busy schedules. Again, I think this speaks to how important work-life balance is to you, that you're willing to take an hour out of your day to talk about work-life balance. So really, on behalf of all the attendees, thank you. We really appreciate it. Sure. I will be sending out an email within the next month or so of once we get this posted to the website. And please feel free to share with your colleagues. This was somewhat targeted to rehabilitation psychology. However, I think we can see that it generalizes beyond that as well. So yeah, I had some thank yous coming in through the line as well. And if for that last question that came in, we'll get back to you after the webinar. But thank you again, and I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful holiday winter season.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.